again, Dynasty Mirror Search for Uhuru. Thank you so much for joining us. Shout out to Monifa in the chat room. Everyone, again, thank you so much for joining. We are so happy that you are here with us this Monday afternoon. Before we get started, guys, as you come into the chat, please hit that like button. Please share the content. Also, please subscribe. That's all we ask. You know, if you're not super chatting or cash apping, you know, the least you can do is share the content. Also, too, make sure you go on Amazon.com, grab the book, Sales Motivation 101. Get off your, you know, Facebook's so funny. So we're going to say, get off your butt and cold call. So written by yours truly. So guys, make sure you go on Amazon. I'm sorry, YouTube's so funny. Yeah, go make sure you go on Amazon and grab the book. Also, my other books are up for sale as well. Greatly appreciate it, you guys. Let's see here. We have our brother Ebube Okoli on with us today, and you know, we're going to be discussing, you know, the geopolitics of Africa post COVID-19. You know, we were just talking, speaking offline, in regards to how this is going to be kind of like a 9/11 situation. I'm gonna tell you a funny story. So, my boss, in fact, I think this wasn't even 9/11. Okay, so it's weird, Abube. So you had 9/11, but what people don't really talk about is security was really heightened after that guy tried to go on a plane with the
Richard Reed, right, with the shoe bomber.
The shoe bomber. That's when stuff really got crazy.
Yeah.
So, you know, they did beef up security after 9/11, but the shoe bomber, that's when it really, for some reason, got crazy. So, funny story. My boss, when I was selling insurance, he was traveling like the day after the shoe bomber situation. And so, like, no one really got the notice as far as what you could bring and carry on the plane. Because, you know, even after 9/11, you can still carry on like liquids and all that. Like I said, the shoe bomber was when they really changed all that.
Yeah.
So he's in security. He has all his toiletries, hairspray, and all that. They're like, nah, you can't take that. Throw that out. Threw that out. They damn near threw out his whole toiletry bag. And he didn't. And no one knew because it just happened. They literally changed the rules like instantly. So 9/11 was a turning point, but what people don't really talk about was the shoe bomber guy, because that's what it really switched. So, you know, of course, now we have COVID, and I'm kind of like, they might make it where either, I know they're going to check your temperature, but it might be a situation, I could be wrong, where kind of like where you have to show your yellow fever card. They might want to see proof of immunization. I could be wrong, you know, but this is just it's interesting. You know, but what are your thoughts as far as, you know, we can start off with travel. How is COVID going to, you know, affect travel, and, you know, tell everybody who you are and where you're from and all that good stuff.
My name is Ebube Okoli. For those who know me, it's good to see you again. For those who don't, it's nice to meet you for the first time. What I'm going to discuss in regards to travel, and when we talk about post-COVID, we have to remember that when we say post-COVID, it doesn't mean that the period where the actual ailment has stopped being novel and maybe there's a vaccine. When we say post, we mean after the main impact.
Right.
What we have left, right? And we were just discussing 9/11. Once the towers fell, that opened Pandora's box. That started a new way of life, and things haven't really gone back to how they were pre-9/11. So these type of events reset the default of what we believed was possible and our general day-to-day lives. So when it comes to travel, and this is assuming that nations don't use this period to settle scores with other nations. Now, what do I mean by that is that right now we have, when it comes to the African continent, we have three major players. We have the United States, we have China, and we, of course, have Africa. Right? In the United States, the cost so far that the government has put out is $2.2 trillion, and they're looking at another package of $3 trillion. So already this is costing America $5 trillion, and $1 trillion is a lot of money. It's 1,000 billion. So now imagine having to spend that type of money when you didn't expect to, and the economy stopped in such a manner that no one could have predicted this January 1st, 2020, right? So now somebody is going to have to pay for this. Is the mentality that these governments are looking at, like, where do we place blame? And that's really going to determine how nations interact with each other, is the fallout of where the blame is placed, ultimately. Right now, you already hear rumblings within Washington about potentially penalizing China for what they did or didn't know. And you hear within China them saying, hey, look, the whole world was affected. Let's just focus on moving forward. Let's forget about the past or who's responsible. Let's just all move forward, which that position would help them. But due to the fact that so many nations are affected, you have a situation where there's going to be clear winners and clear losers, and the clear winners are going to be the people who have lost the least. So when it comes to travel, you might start seeing one nation say, well, citizens from this continent or this country, they can't come here, not because they have anything to do with the pandemic, but because that nation didn't like the other nation to begin with, and now they're using this as a guise to now push an alternative foreign policy, if you will. So when it comes to travel, it depends on where the blame is apportioned.
Right.
We'll see how that goes, because I'm actually itching to go back to Nigeria soon.
Man, I'm supposed to listen. I was literally, today was the day I'm supposed to be returning back from Nigeria. Then I was supposed to be there in March.
And it's just something about when you land in the airport and you smell the air and you know you're in Africa.
Right, you know you're in Africa.
You need that at least once a year.
Right. For me, it's when you're making that descent
and you look out the window.
You try to look at the window.
It's like I'm home.
The pilot tells you you're descending.
You know what I was thinking about in those final moments of dissension? I'm like, I hope I didn't forget anything in the U.S. You know what I mean?
I'm just like, oh, finally made it. You know, it's a long flight, so usually what I do, I get on the plane, I watch a movie, eat. In fact, we got to talk about this. They're talking about now, like if you're flying domestic, they're not going to feed you anything on the plane, and then they're saying if you fly international, only thing you're going to get is some snacks.
Well, see, that's another one of those. See, that's another. What people are doing with this pandemic is they're using it to make very permanent decisions that they've always wanted to make. Like, for example, if you wanted to cut out free drinks, you can say, well, it's not as sanitary. Let's get rid of that and let's save this $200 million per annum. So a lot of nations are making those type of decisions now. So, for example, you take Africa. Let's look at Africa and let's look at China. Now, America is important in this equation because they're really going to dictate what happens when it comes to Africa. So now China over the last 20 years went on a lending spree in Africa. And the reason China did this is because China's trapped in something that they're trying to not be trapped in. It's called the middle income trap, which means that their country becomes too expensive to be with the developing nations and taking advantage of the things that are to be taken advantage of in a developing nation, but they're not as advanced enough to be taking advantage of the things from an advanced economy. So they're kind of in the middle, like South Africa or Brazil. And you can perpetually stay there forever, where you're never really fully a developed nation, but you're not a developing nation. So what China was engaging in prior to all of this, and in the last 30 years, but they recently stopped, is they needed to always be building something. Without building anything, their economy would have problems. So they just started constructing whole cities. Dynasty, if you see how large these cities are, these cities could, the size of Pittsburgh, the size of Charlotte, they could house hundreds of thousands of people, but they only house maybe 12,000 people. Now, what China figured is, you know what? Rather than building all these cities that nobody's going to live in, let's just build stuff in Africa. And let's make it in such a way where it's a win-win. And what they did is they went to these African nations and they basically said, hey, do you need a metro line? Do you need a 300-mile metro line? We'll build it. And some African nations like, well, we don't have that in the budget. And China said, no problem. We'll give you the money. You just have to sign these agreements that if you default, we get to take that train system we just put in. And so they said, well, okay. And some of the African leaders might or may not have inflated the contracts. Who knows? There are allegations of that happening. But once the Chinese would give that contract out to build in this African nation, they would also make sure the money came through a Chinese bank, a Chinese company would execute the actual contract, Chinese engineers would be there on ground, Chinese staff would actually construct. Of course, for example, in Kenya, they would bring some Kenyans on, but the vast majority of the people who created and operated it would be from China.
And in the Kenya, there's nothing more than cheap labor as far as upper level management. They're all Chinese, you know.
If that. And so now you have a situation where China is winning because they're getting rid of some of that excess labor that would just sit around in their country, and they don't have to build ghost towns. They can build things in Africa, and the money is coming from China. And because a Chinese company is executing the contract, the money is coming back to China, and that nation is going to be left with the interest payments and the debt. And if they ever default, then China just keeps whatever they put in your country.
Right.
So it's a win-win for China. So China, over the last 20 years, has been engaging in these type of deals with African nations. Now, there's nothing wrong with this from the Chinese end, but from the African end, the Africans need to get in the habit. We as Africans need to get in the habit of demanding better deals, especially when we're in a position to be in the advantage. Like, for example, China needed Africa because China needs to be building things. Right. So if all African nations say, you know what, we don't need what you're building, China is in serious problems. Now, if you look at the Chinese, when foreign nations wanted to come into China, they would make these foreign nations give, like, for example, if you wanted to start constructing cars in China, you would have to give the government agencies the blueprints of the cars you're constructing, and then a breakdown of all the positions and what they do. And then they'd bring a Chinese equivalent to understudy that position of what you're doing in that company. And they already have the blueprints. So in a few years, they'd be able to replicate what you're doing. Therein, they never gave anybody a monopoly. They made sure there was a technology transfer. But in African countries over the last 20 years, this hasn't been the case because, as you noted, it's typically lower level people who don't really get the knowledge of what's going on. They don't get the technology. So unfortunately, there wasn't a technology transfer. Now, here's another key thing when we come to the post-COVID-19 world. We have a lot of African nations who've taken a lot of these type of loans for these infrastructures. And right now, if nothing changes, China is in the position to acquire a lot of infrastructure in Africa based on defaults because the entire world has stopped, right? That's just what's going to happen on paper based on how the deals were structured. Now, that's the theoretical route. If these nations default based on what they've signed, China has the ability to come in and seize key infrastructure. However, a lot of African nations are looking at it and saying, they're looking at the United States because the United States is apportioning blame to the Chinese. And what happens with nations is there's something called precedent. So now if America is because in this particular administration, you hear a lot of talk about what the administration plans to do. Now, you don't know if it's all feasible or not. But if the talk of America potentially penalizing the Chinese government for what they knew or their mitigation efforts and preventing the entire world economy from being stopped, if they can somehow apportion that blame and get some sort of money or compensation for the role that China may or may not have played, then other nations, it would be like a domino effect. For example, in Africa, there are already rumblings where some nations are saying, look, the reason we can't export our raw materials to the world markets as we did previously is because of the pandemic that we are not responsible for. So to now enforce a contract on us that says if we default on certain loan payments, that we now have to give up a port, as what happened in Kenya in 2019 with the Mombasa port.
Did that really happen, or was that fake news? That really happened?
The thing is this. It's like, let's say you have a credit card and you're negligent in those payments, and they send you a letter saying, we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. We're going to report you. And the fact that they're moving in that direction is very dangerous because it shows that this nation is on the verge of default. Right. So if the speculations are already being released and news agencies are saying that the port was lost in 2019, that's not a good sign. So China stands to benefit if a lot of African nations can no longer export their raw materials to the world market. So, for example, in Nigeria, oil is actually, this is the first time where it's more expensive to take oil than to not take oil, which means that when you take the oil on, you're going to pay to have to store it because a lot of people aren't traveling. They're not moving. If you go to a gas station, you're going to get the best deal since the 80s because gas.
Let me stop you right there. That's if you're buying 87. But if you're buying like high grade, you're not saving no money.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the massive people. I know you're not. You're probably buying super premium. You know.
Yeah. It's definitely not. No.
But yeah, it's been the same thing. You've noticed that too. I'm just talking about generally with the with the prices of general gas. That reflects on the entire market as a whole. Right. Is that right now certain commodities just aren't selling because people aren't using them. People aren't traveling as they were. People aren't catching flights. People aren't really moving around the country. People aren't really driving state to state. Right now, this is the travel season. This is the season when most people start making most road trips. So now if people are making those road trips, these African nations can't sell their oil because oil's not being used. And if oil's not being used, then they don't have any foreign exchange. If they don't have any foreign exchange, they don't have any money to service their debt and pay the interest on those loans. If they can't pay the interest on those loans, then certain key infrastructure in their nation belongs to China.
Right.
So now what these African nations are hoping is that the United States, being that it's the country that's taken the lead on potentially having China compensate the United States, if America is successful in what they are discussing, then a lot of African nations have a blueprint to say, not only can you not take this key infrastructure, but in fact, you may even owe us some money at the end of all of this, because right now we don't know how long the economies are going to be shut down for. We just don't know. Right?
And then somebody brought up, I know we were speaking on as far as the type of deals that African countries have made with China. Stephen Hill in the chat room, he brings up a great point. Magufuli of Tanzania has done a great job of restructuring contracts and making great deals for his people. Is that another? I wonder how that process works when you go back to China and say, hey, I know the previous president signed this, but we're doing this. I wonder how that looks like.
A lot of people have never really been in the contract process or seen how these things go. But many times it's very informal, a lot of these deals. What happens is countries reach an understanding, and then the actual instrument that was signed would just memorialize that understanding, but there may be things in there that weren't discussed at the agreements that the nation will now say, hey, look, we had an understanding about this, this, and this. This was just in the contract, and we're not going to really abide by that. And the other nation might say, okay, well, that makes sense, because sometimes it's a legal term called boilerplate. But with this particular situation that I'm going to reference, for example, in Nigeria, there were reports that there was a contract that was signed, but the contract was in Chinese. Right.
That's just recent, right? That was just recently.
Yeah. So now, Dynas, let's say you come into government office and you're looking at the contract that your predecessor signed with the Chinese, and it's in Mandarin, and you ask for the English copy, and they don't have it. That gives you serious leverage to now renegotiate the terms and say, listen.
But does it?
Well, here's why. Because there might be legal ways to break that contract. Because at the end of the day, if you don't speak Mandarin, Mandarin is an official language of your nation. You're not expected to know Mandarin. And the only copy of a contract that they had was in Mandarin. You have legal grounds to potentially say, we're not going to abide by the stipulations of this particular contract.
I don't know. That is kind of tricky. I know I dealt with contracts just on a business to business level. And we'll have situations where like I'll get a contract signed by a general manager. That general manager leaves. Then like 3 years later, the new general manager is like, I didn't sign a contract. We were like, look, the previous general manager that was here signed the contract. So sorry. And the business is still here. So
But there's that too. And that's what a lot of African nations are facing right now. Africa's bought in the last 20 years over $150 billion worth of loans for infrastructure projects. And part of the problem is sometimes when these loans come through, the government officials don't necessarily use them for the infrastructure projects. They'll use them for consumption, meaning that these end up in bank accounts sometimes in various nations in the world. Sometimes they'll end up building mansions in Abuja and different places like that. And the problem with that is that you've taken out a loan that was supposed to be used for infrastructure, like building light, so that everybody who enjoys this light will now be taxed a little bit more to pay back that loan. But because there's now steady light infrastructure, there can be a blossoming of light industrial and heavy industrial. But because that money was siphoned away, there's no electricity, there's no added electricity, there was no value from that loan. And now the only thing that you're stuck with are interest payments. See, that's the potential problem with a lot of African nations right now, is that they may be pushed into a position where, the person before signed this deal, somehow the money didn't end up where it was supposed to be, it was misappropriated. Right. And now you have certain generations, 3 or 4 generations of that particular nation are now stuck with those interest payments that may harm or cripple the economy of that particular country. And that's the position that a lot of African nations are in right now, is that a lot of African nations were on the verge of default. To speak frankly, a lot of African nations were what we call living check to check. So now that the world economy is stopped, which is an event that nobody could have predicted. There's no one who would say, well, the world's economy is going to stop in late February, early March of 2020, and everybody is essentially going to be in their houses, and that's going to be the new reality of the world. Right. So imagine how many nations weren't prepared for this. So the winners in the geopolitical game when it comes to post-COVID world are going to be those who have lost the least. Currently, we look at countries like China. Right now, there's a lot of ill will going towards China from a lot of different nations. So the only issue is that a lot of nations talk about removing their manufacturing from China, but if you remove the manufacturing, many of the key components that you need are going to come from China. So you can merely assemble in your own country, but you're still relying on China. And the Chinese manufacturing base will just switch to what the demand dictates. So China right now, a lot of people might be having problems with them, but they still are the only nation who can do what they do, because all other nations have been frozen in place. And it's not as if there's a nation on another planet who hasn't been affected by this particular pandemic.
Guys, make sure you hit that like button as well. And what we'll do, make sure you subscribe to. We'll open the lines up in about 10, 15 minutes. If you guys want to call in and ask a question, you guys can. I'll post the email up here shortly. But yeah, I can't think of one event like this. I mean, Murtala Muhammad, the airport has been closed and it's not reopening till June 15th, from what I understand.
And that's just the tentative date. That could always be pushed back. And right now there's talk to push that back another 2 weeks. And that's just talk, though. Listen, Dynast, that's just talk. That's just talk.
But it's
frustrating, because at the end of the day, the world is the world is a place you're supposed to explore and travel, and you get different energies everywhere you are. You know, it is unfortunate not to be able to move from continent to continent, but at the end of the day, it is in the best interest of everybody to try and be as safe as they can. You know.
Yeah, but it's the thing is, and who brought it to Nigeria was an Italian tourist.
That's the reported patient 0.
Right.
And at the time, Italy was, the problem with Italy was this: a lot of people in Italy didn't necessarily see. There was a time, right? There was a small time when people were saying, "Oh, Corona, it's spring break. I'm going out. I'm going to enjoy it." They didn't look at it as if it was something serious. They looked at it as if it was something like a swine flu or any of these other ones that have come and gone. They just said it's just going to be just like that, and I'm going to be okay. So in Italy, for example, a lot of people didn't really understand the impact it was going to have until much later. Similar to what happened in the United States with a lot of the spring breakers who were saying, you know what, I'm okay, I'm going to be all right, let me just enjoy. And then a lot of them defused and went to their cities. So the problem that happened in Italy was a similar situation to what happened in the United States. And that during that phase where people go from, oh, it's something I hear on the news, to, wait a minute, this is a very real situation. This is something that I really need to take serious, was very long in Italy. So which prolonged the time that people weren't taking it seriously, which really enhanced the time that a lot of people we're going to be exposed. And this, when it comes to this particular ailment, it's very contagious, even if the person's asymptomatic, which is the craziest part. So now you had a lot of people getting it. So it's not surprising that somebody from that country coming into Nigeria was the person who brought that to the country. And that also shows you something about Nigeria, because Nigeria was slow to close the airports, slow to close the borders. There were reports all over. Other nations were closing their borders, closing the countries off. And Nigeria, to an extent, a lot of nations in Africa were just kind of taking a back seat and saying, well, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. So they were still allowing people in. So that means that us as Africans need to start taking a more proactive stance when it comes to some of these things. We need to actually be a little bit more proactive. So, for example, what I'm seeing right now with the proactive is we have a situation where there's an African nation claiming that they have medication to treat the ailment. And some African nations are saying, you know what, let's try this nation's
Madagascar,
precisely. Let's try this nation's solution. Now, the good thing is that African nations are behaving like independent nations. They're saying, give us a sample. We're going to call our best scientists, and we're going to see what's in this concoction that you guys are saying is what it is. And we're going to try and understand it the best we can before we decide if this is something that we want to bring into our country, which is actually a beautiful thing, because they're behaving like independent nations. There are two extremes we want to avoid. Those two extremes are saying, oh, well, this is from Africa, it must be good, let's just all rush to it, and then fools have rushed in, or saying, you know what do African nations know? Let's wait for the European solution. That would be the opposite end. So a lot of African nations are in the middle saying, you know what, let's get this solution, let's analyze this solution, and let us as Africans decide whether or not this is something we want to give to the mass population of our country.
Absolutely. Let's see here. Everyone, thank you for joining. Let me go ahead and put my email in the chat. So if you guys want to call in and ask a question, by all means, please do. If you want to call in and ask a question, please do. Yeah, but not a min. That's like part of the topic. Like, we have a whole topic. So we're speaking on COVID right now, okay, and how it's going to affect the effect on geopolitical politics. That's what we're dealing with. Not a min. Thank you, Pan Afro Canum. Thank you for the super chat, brother. I appreciate it. Thank you for the super chat. Really, really means a lot. It's a very interesting time. Now, do you think, just speaking to other professionals, they're saying we might have a reoccurrence or another breakout come like this winter. What are your thoughts on that? And how is that going to make things even worse if that were to happen?
And so most medical experts right now are saying that that's most likely going to be the case, especially as lockdowns ease. We're going to see a resurgence just naturally. And so this may be something like we talked about earlier with the changes that happened after 9/11. And you said everything has to be looked at together. You can't compartmentalize anything, because after the attacks of 9/11, you now had the shoe bomber, and then you had the underwear bomber. And then from there, you had all sorts of situations that now exacerbated the current laws and the protocols that were on the books and affected things that were off the books. So there were very permanent changes made. So now when we look at this particular situation, the same thing is most likely going to apply.
All right, guys, let me check my email, see if we got anybody that's interested in calling in. Again, guys, hit that like button, share, subscribe, go to Amazon, pick up a book, family. Please pick up a book. Greatly appreciate it. Let's see here. No, don't call in, guys. Don't encourage them to call in. No need. I mean, but if you want to, if you want to call in, go ahead and call in. Go ahead and call in. You got the email. Go ahead and call in. Now, Ebube, a lot of people are low-key upset that this virus hasn't had the impact on Africa in the same manner that it's had on Europe and America. Um, I mean, we know why, but why is that? We know why, but
Well,
what are your thoughts on that?
here's the thing that we have to look at too. Now, for example, with America has the highest reported numbers, right?
Right.
So the key there is reported.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at nations like China, the effect isn't as drastic based on what's reported.
Mm-hmm.
But if we look at other indicators like pollution levels and the fact that this is the cleanest that the skies in many Chinese cities have ever been,
and in places like LA and here in America too,
you now have to ask ourselves that this is taking a bigger effect than maybe these people are giving on to.
right?
So now when we look at those numbers, we have to say, at the end of the day, just because they're not being reported doesn't mean that it's not happening. Now, one of the things that I've taken note of are, for example, in Kano. In Kano, there were a lot of mysterious deaths, very well-profiled people dropping dead within close proximity to each other. And you'd be reading about these and you'd look for the cause of death. They say it was a protracted illness. And now you would wonder, is this an unreported or underreported death? And so part of the problem is that we as Africans, we might not take this as seriously as we need to yet.
Right.
Because we might not be seeing that it is affecting us. Maybe it might be affecting us more than we've been reporting. And so that might adversely affect us because now people aren't going to take it as seriously as they could have taken it. So the thing is, we have to ask ourselves, are these deaths or infection rates being properly reported? That's the major key at this point.
Got you. Okay. Because I guess Buhari's top aide, one of his top aides, passed away from it.
Well, Mamandara, Abakayari, right?
I think so.
Abakayari was a very central figure in this Nigerian administration.
Wow.
Some analysts state that he was essentially running the country on a day-to-day level. It's like, for example, Dynast, let's say you have a company, Dynast Amir Incorporated, and of course you're all over the globe. You're in 6 different countries in 6 different days, and the company's based in Oakland. You might not be there in Oakland every day to run the company, so you might put somebody in charge, right?
Right.
Somebody that you trust, right?
Right.
And somebody that would make decisions, hopefully the same way you'd make decisions, right?
Right. A clone of me.
That's who Abakayari was. He was essentially the person that when Buhari was dealing with Nigeria to France, Nigeria to the United States, Nigeria to China, he was the face taking care of that. Now, the person running the country, which is like the company internally from day to day, was Abakayari. There was a time when Muhammadu Buhari told all the ministers and everybody like that, if you want to see me, first go through him, and he will brief me on the meeting that you two had. Now, that gives a person a lot of power, because if I don't like what you're saying, I'll write a negative report, and you're never going to really speak to the president. You're going to speak to me. So if you don't do what I like or what I think is normal or within the normal course of action of what I want to see done within my agenda, I can deny you to the presidency. So he was the chief of staff, but he had a very powerful position. Some people called him the de facto president. So when it hit him, a lot of people were very concerned because he was one of the top guys in this government when it came to the day-to-day running of the country.
Well, I'm surprised they didn't let him go to Europe and get treated. That's kind of what the African leaders do.
Well, and you have to remember too.
Travel. Yeah.
Those nations said, "Hey, if you got problems, deal with it within your borders." And that's another thing African nations need to take note of. There may come a time, if you don't fully equip your countries with proper medical equipment, There may come a time when you're stuck in your country with the nonsense medical equipment that you left there for the masses.
Right.
So now you have situations where they're flying doctors in from all over the world to come in, but at the end of the day, the equipment just isn't up to par to really be able to save certain lives.
Exactly. I think hopefully we get through this, but this has just been I think this is hopefully it's a once in a lifetime experience. Because again, whoever thought airports would be shut down, I knew something was going on when they shut the NBA down.
Yeah.
When they shut the NBA down, I said, okay. Because at first I was like, it ain't that serious. But when they shut the NBA down, I was like, okay, something ain't right. And then when I caught it, but when they shut the NBA down, I was like, okay, let me try to stock up on. Then I couldn't get any mask, couldn't buy that, no hand sanitizer. I'm like, okay, something's not right.
And right now, what we're looking at is we're looking at a world, we don't know how long the economy is going to be stopped. And we don't know so for example, in Nigeria right now, the price of oil used to be a cash cow that the government could always rely on. At the end of the day, any defects with the Nigerian government, for example, were saved by the fact that there was US dollars coming in from oil.
Right.
So that was always the saving grace. But right now, oil isn't what it used to be. So what's going to happen, for example, in Nigeria is we're going to have an influx of people into the government who have solutions. Because now, if oil stays as it is, a lot more people are working from home, a lot less people are traveling state to state, and this is prolonged, oil isn't going to be the cash cow that it was in the 90s and early 2000s and 20 teens, if you will. Oil is going to be something like coal, something that you can't rely on. Because, for example, in Nigeria, there's coal in Enugu. Nobody makes a big deal about it. In fact, the government doesn't even harvest that coal because coal at this point, it's really not what it was, and it's a precious resource. It's just not that valued on the world market. So now if oil transitions to the status of coal, what's going to happen is that the government inefficiencies and the things that were masked by the fact that there was oil to always cover inadequacies within the Nigerian government and administration are going to change, because now those positions might not be as attractive if there's not a guarantee of oil money, which is good, because those people who went there solely for the perks of being in office are going to look at it as that it's useless to go there because I can't extract resources from the country in the same way that I used to extract resources. So those guys are going to go into something else, and the people who are going to say, you know what, I have a solution. The reason I'm pursuing government office is because I have a solution. Those people are now going to be given leeway to now go in and propose and show their solutions, which ultimately will be a good thing for the African continent, because what's really going to change the African continent are going to be the third wave leaders, people who were born in the 80s, 90s.
You.
Why not? And so we're going to be the generation who's going to say, you know what, we're coming in with common sense, and we're essentially going to do what needs to be done because we have a certain standard. There's a certain standard Nigerians need to be living at. And if you're not going to put Nigerians at that standard, you don't need to be anywhere near the seat of leadership. Those leaders are now pushing forward. Those are called the third generational leaders, the leaders who are going to actually put the nation first because they understand where the nation is and where the nation needs to be.
All right, so Christy's question is, thank you, Christy, for the support. Christy, I want to send you a postcard, Christy. Christy, have you emailed me your address? I want to send you a postcard. Email me. You always support me. Thank you so much. Do you think Nigeria's economy and African economies will ever recover from this?
Now, when we look at this, we have to understand that Africa is in a tough position because on paper, many African nations have signed very bad deals. Many African nations have signed very bad deals where they're risking their national infrastructure. So after everything is said and done and we look at the actual fallout of this pandemic, African nations can now apportion blame and say, listen, so for example, take Angola, that's reportedly $25 billion in debt. And that debt is owned by China, right?
Mm-hmm.
You take a nation like Ethiopia, that's $13.5 billion in debt to China. Those interest payments are crazy on those type of loans. Imagine having a credit card bill of $25 billion. You can imagine what the monthly payments on that would be. And so a lot of African nations are solely reliant on exporting natural resources because African economies haven't been restructured. They're still the same as the colonial economies, where if you're good at exporting cocoa, you export cocoa. That's what you do. You don't process the cocoa. You don't make chocolate. They make the chocolate in Belgium. You just send the chocolate to Belgium, but then they process it into chocolate and sell it back to you, and you pay exorbitant prices for it. That's the economy of most African countries. Now, things are changing, of course. You have Dangote, who's saying, let's process our crude oil into other materials. Let's not just export raw materials. So you have citizens like that who are stepping up and doing good things. And a lot of other Africans who are in the Navy, for example, setting up factories to construct different medical devices, which is good. Hopefully the quality is up to par, because once the quality can be up to par on the international level, you have something domestically that you can use. And that's one of the things we struggle with in Nigeria, is making sure that the quality is up to par and competitive with the international products. Once we can get there, then we're moving forward in manufacturing. So now, once we look at the economy of a lot of African nations that are based on exporting raw materials, and we look at the fact that a lot of these nations are one payment away from losing key infrastructure to China, who gave them billions of dollars in loans, we have to ask, how will they recover? Now, they may recover based on the fact that they apportion blame somewhere else and get compensated for it. So, for example, the rumblings are that African nations should be forgiven of the debt that they've taken, because the country that they took those loans from, to an extent, may or may not be responsible for this pandemic at the end of the day. And if they're responsible, then they're responsible for the fact that this oil that was bringing in billions of dollars every single month is no longer selling. So the recovery is going to be based on whether or not these nations can apportion blame, because at the end of the day, someone is going to have to pay for this. That's just the reality. Someone is going to have to pay for this. The economy has been stalled for many months. The fact that you drive around and 90% of the businesses that you see are closed up or operating under very limited circumstances, money is not flowing in the economy. And so someone is going to have to pay for this, because already there was a $2.2 trillion package, and a lot of people received the check of it was a little over $1,000.
I didn't get mine.
And, yeah, I think I might have made too much money last year. Who knows? But the thing is this, right? There's another package that's coming up looking like $3 trillion. So we have to ask ourselves, who's going to pay all of this? Who is responsible for all of this? Right. And now the United States looks like they're going to be taking the lead on it. And if that happens, then that means it's going to be a domino effect, as other nations are going to say, well, and because this is a global pandemic, there's nobody on this planet that hasn't been slowed down.
Right.
There's no country that hasn't lost months of income based on the fact that their economy was grounded to zero, which in economics is a theoretical scenario you don't even stipulate over, because you just assume it's never going to happen.
Right.
So now Africa's economic recovery is based on who is going to pay for this. So to answer Christy A's question, once the question of who is going to pay for this is solved, that will determine a lot with Africa's recovery.
Let me ask you this. How's this going to affect the refinery, the Dangote's refinery? What do you think?
Well, right now, unfortunately, a lot of, and like any other company, your supply chain is messed up. You would see weekly, before this pandemic, you would see weekly heavy equipments coming into the country, specially designed equipments coming into the country. And they would be set up. But right now, nothing's coming into the country.
Right.
And certain materials that you may have needed are delayed. So if they're delayed for 6 months, the whole project is delayed for 6 months.
Right. Wow. Yes.
It's unfortunate because
and that's a
that
huge project.
needs to come on. It needs to come on stream.
Yeah.
There's going to be so much economic development, and Dangote is doing he's doing a very good thing with that refinery.
Mm-hmm.
So once he puts that on stream, it's going to be a good thing. But once again, we're in unprecedented times. This is history right now. Our grandchildren are going to read about this time, and they're going to ask you, "Was it really like that?" And you're like, "Yes."
Yeah,
the whole world stopped for several months.
Right. Who's financing this refinery? Like I was reading somewhere, like one of just like not the drill, but something as far as it has to do with the oil refinery. Like one of the main parts of the refinery, and they needed a number of them, was like $100 million. It was something crazy. Like,
yeah. And the thing is, it came in on its own barge, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and the thing is, listen, you're building one of the world's largest refineries. Like, if I give you that task now and say, Donis, listen, you're going to build the world's largest refinery in Lekki, you're going to spend a lot of money. You're going to, and another thing is, it's part specific, right? Like, where else are you going to find any of these parts? So they have to be custom ordered.
Right.
But the investment is worth it because Nigeria for too long has been selling crude oil, which means you sell crude oil, the people you sell it to refine it, sell it back to you, and then you have a nation where you're buying back a refined product based on the fact that you sent out an unrefined product. You need to refine it within your nation because once you refine crude oil produces a lot of things. It produces petroleum jelly, Vaseline, it produces gasoline, kerosene. So once you refine it, you have about 8 more products than if you just sold it as its unrefined raw form.
Let's see here. Pro Woman J. I'm going to send you the link right now. So we'll bring you on, and then after that, we'll close out. Everyone, thank you for joining. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you share and subscribe as well. Let's see here. Pro Woman J. I am sending you the link right now. So come on in. Bam. There you go. Come on in. Yes, I was wondering how that would affect the refinery because it's supposed to come online next year or 2022.
The timetable's been pushed back. I mean, everything's been stopped. So theoretically, had this whole pandemic not happened, yeah, sure, that would have happened. But now that the pandemic has happened, we have to reevaluate a lot of timetables.
Right. The future of Nigeria, Ebube, what do you post-COVID? What do you? Let me go ahead. Then we'll ask Chrissy's question. But go ahead.
All right. Now, what's going to happen is this: the Nigerian administration, unfortunately, has become lazy because oil was always there to cover inadequacies. Oil was always there to cover misgovernance. Oil was always there to cover everything that needed to be covered. And Nigeria is in a certain situation where certain economic sectors are locked down by the federal government, meaning that the federal government has too much power over natural resources. So a state governor, for example, can't harness certain resources within that state because the federal government has it on the exclusive list. And because the federal government has that item on the exclusive list.
Hello?
Indigents.
Yeah. We'll get to you. Just give us 1 second. He's answering the question.
So indigents can't utilize that natural resource in their backyard. So if now the federal government doesn't move in, for example, coal in Enugu, if the federal government doesn't move in and harvest that resource, it just lies there fallow. So what's going to happen is a lot of states in Nigeria, for example, they're not viable. They're just there because they were depending on the oil allocation that they would get every single month. But now at this point, if the oil allocation isn't there, every state now has to say, what do I produce? What can I sell? And how can I make this state a productive state to cover the cost of running the state? Currently, the cost of running the state are taking care of oil. So you don't need to be productive, which means you get a government job in certain states. You go there, you sit down, you relax, you collect your salary, and you didn't do anything to further the state. That's looking to change as long as oil stays at the value that it's at currently. Nigeria as a nation is going to have to dig deep and restructure the economic governance of the country.
As Christy A said, Pro Woman, are you there?
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you fine. We're just gonna. I'm gonna ask one more question, and then we'll let you ask your question. Okay.
Cool.
Okay, Christy A, are there going to be actual Africans working high-level jobs in this refinery? Otherwise, what's the point? Shad, I mean, that's a good, because I mean, now the Dangote's right hand man is an Indian guy, I think. So,
And that's one thing we need to address in Africa, because, for example, if you look at most of the Chinese contracts, for the Chinese to build anything in your nation, they're going to charge you, and they're going to use a Chinese bank, and then they're going to also write in the contract that you have to use a Chinese company, a
right.
Chinese labor. And they're going to essentially bring in everybody they can from the top to the bottom and give a few Africans a few token positions, but essentially
Right.
it's them running the company. And we need to ensure that that's not the case. Now, with Dangote's refinery, there are a lot of Indians who are actually in that company.
Right.
Now, there are a lot of high-level Nigerians, but on that particular project, of course, yes, there's a high number of expatriates. Now, we as Nigerians need to make sure, for example, in the 70s, there was the indigenization decree, which means that any company in Nigeria has to have majority ownership by a Nigerian, which means that Nigerians have to own 51% of any company doing business in Nigeria, which was great, because all of a sudden, Nigerians became shareholders overnight, right? Now, we have a certain situation in Nigeria where we need to make sure that the workers, when you come in to execute projects in Nigeria, we need to make sure that at least, at the minimum, 51% of the company, and not just the company. African nations need to have the same contracts that China has. China has contracts where every high-level position has to have a Chinese equivalent. So if there's a manager of production that's foreign, there's at least one Chinese citizen who is going to be the understudy of that manager of production, and the law mandates that this person has to be given certain hours. You have to take them on certain trips. Essentially, you have to teach them what you know. We need to have the same situation Chinese have with foreigners. Africans need to have those same situations when the Chinese come to us, because at the end of the day, we need to have technology transfer. We just can't have people come in from other nations, build things. They're getting money for building it, which they're going to take back to their country, which means Nigeria loses out, because we might have paid these people when we could have paid a Nigerian citizen who will keep the money within the country.
Absolutely. All right, Pro Woman, go ahead with your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
We hear you just fine.
Hi, Dynast. Hi, Ebube.
Hey, how you doing?
Hello. I want to make a couple of comments. I always said, and then I have a question. I've always said that the discipline that the Chinese has also given them a callousness in the way that they do business, in the way that they treat people around the world. And I think maybe we're starting to see a little bit of that surface in how they've handled this COVID epidemic. That's one thing. A couple things. Trials reveal things. And a positive revelation that I think has come out of this is it seems like African governments are able to do more and more for its people. For example, in Ghana, they're offering free water, no water bills for the course of the pandemic, bonus pay for doctors and nurses, and they put up sanitizing stations, hand washing stations around the country for people to wash their hands. I saw something to the same effect. I think the Congo or something is doing something similar. Someone invented a hand washing station or something. So what I like is I've seen that it seems like African governments are being able to do more and more for its people, and that's something that we didn't expect. And also, African nations have been used to dealing with outbreaks. And so we're seeing that maybe that they have been a little more efficient than people would have thought that they would have been, because they have dealt with outbreaks and are used to using what they have to maximum effectiveness. And I've heard that Senegal has found some kind of a breakthrough treatment even too. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Lastly, I wanted to ask you, and you, Dynast and Ebube, you can comment, repatriation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Dynast says he's out of here, he's done with America, he's got to go back, and encourages African Americans to just leave. And now there's something being formed called the Exodus Alliance. Where
let me say this. I'm more balanced now. I think.
Oh yay!
Let me say this. America's still a great place to make money, but take that money and invest it in Africa. All right. My thing is, you need to be prepared when something hits the fan, and you could smoothly. Not saying it's always going to be a smooth transition, but you can smoothly transition into Africa. So you need to be prepared where if something happens, you go to Africa and you're set up and prepared. So that's what I'm saying. I would say be back and forth.
Okay,
But
see,
at the
yay.
same time, the people who are like, I'm out, I agree. I don't disagree with them. But the people that are like, nah, I'm American. Our bones are buried here, and this, that, and the other. I strongly disagree with that.
Well, I and Edube can comment on this as well because I've often wondered how will first and second gens feel about repatriation when they're going to be here and they're going to be able to say, well, we've been here and we've made a contribution, and they'll start to feel like they have a bigger and bigger stake here in America. I'm glad you've evolved, Dynas, because my
And
feeling.
but see, the thing is, we have no stake in America. What do we own? What do we control? Nothing.
But but the see, and this is my bone with the expatriates because I'm for black power. I'm for black people being empowered and protected wherever we are. And wherever we are right now, we're subjugated. So if you leave America, well, let me finish real quick. If you leave America and you go back to Africa, you are still going to live in a system where you are subjugated. For right now, that is the fact of the matter. Now, if people say, well, I want to go back to Africa and I feel better that I can fight there. I can make a better difference there because the goal is freedom and independence for black people wherever we are on the planet. That's what Europeans have done. Australia, Israel, South Africa, satellite European countries are not impoverished. And I want the same thing for African people wherever we are because we are never all going back to the continent. We're not all going back. So why not go back and say I want to make the home motherland a power base. We want to get that empowered so that we can go and protect and defend and provide for black people wherever we are. Because Dinah, your family's going to be here. So let's say you go back to Africa and I'll be
Okay,
quiet.
let me ask you this: have you heard the story of Aaron and Lot in the Bible?
Oh, yeah, that whole.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I stand.
Well,
And another thing, sister, here's the issue. And like a lot of African Americans, they're entitled to this country, right? Because without the contribution of African Americans giving free labor to design and build and create the wealth of this country wouldn't be what it is. This
thank you,
country is what it is because of the free labor that was taken from Africans.
thank you.
And so Africans, to an extent that we're here and we're a part of that, they need to be compensated because at the end of the day, you can't build the wealth of a nation where other people will come and benefit and those people not get compensated for their contribution. So that's one thing. So there are some African Americans who say, you know what, I'm going to stay here because I'm owed from this government. Other people shouldn't benefit off of a government that my ancestors basically created the wealth of. That's understandable. Now, there's another set of people who say, you know what, it's hard, but it's easier in Africa because the persecution isn't direct. Africa is the only place that you or I or anyone that's an African or African descent can go to and feel free, where if there's a problem that you have with somebody, it's because of your character and your personality and not because of your skin color, because we all share that. And it's good to live under those circumstances. So some African Americans will say, you know what, I want to go where I feel free and I'm not directly persecuted. Some African Americans say, you know what, I'm going to stay here and make sure that I get what I'm owed because my ancestors created the wealth of this nation. And you can't fault them either. Stay here and fight. That's what you're supposed to do. But those who want to go to Africa, come in with something tangible. Because at the end of the day, a lot of African Americans look at Africa as a closed off continent. They'll vacation everywhere. They'll go to Australia. They'll fly over the whole African continent and go to Australia. They'll fly over the whole Pacific and go, you'll be like, what? Well, why not Africa? Why isn't that a vacation spot? Why isn't that a tourist destination? Why don't you want to get to know about that? And that's what we need to change. We need more African Americans to say, hey, look, let's go into Africa and let's bring our skills. because I can build generational wealth for myself outside of the country. And you know what? I can give birth to children and they'll have dual citizenship. They can go to Africa if they want to stay there and stay out there and compete and do well, they can stay there. Or if they want to come to America, they can come to America. But at least it gives the next generation that option.
And that's what I'm for.
Your question.
And I'm for Black African people, wherever we are, having the option to live free and empowered and protected. And for my concern is that if, by the way, I've been to Africa and I plan on
what country did you go to? What country did you go to?
I went to Ghana, Togo, and Benin. So
okay, you went to Accra or Kumasi? Because Ghana is a big place.
Yeah, I went to Accra and Kumasi. And in fact, I made an investment in Africa, and his name is Isaac Mensa. I put a young man through school. We did a service learning trip day, and I taught in a classroom. I helped a young school teacher. He was 19 at that time. And then we kept in touch, and you know how it goes. He hit me up, hey, send some money, help me put me through school. So I ended up putting the school teacher who I worked with, I put him through school, and that's my investment in Africa. He's now an agricultural worker. The government of Canada is working with Ghana to do some things agriculturally. So now he has a job in the agricultural industry. So that's my investment in Africa, and there will be more to come. So I'm not averse to going back to Africa. My concern,
you know, in Ghana right now, the hospitality industry is blowing up. You might want to invest in that as well. But you have to make sure that you have somebody on the ground. Don't ever just send money to Africa as an investment. Make sure that you have somebody on the ground that you trust that's receiving it and applying it properly. But if you can do that, then you've unlocked Africa for yourself and for the next generation.
Oh,
And I would say this. I just personally think it's kind of disingenuous to say that the problems that we have in Black America are going to follow us when we go to Africa. I mean,
They will, Dynast. We gotta face it. You wherever you go, Dynast.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing, right? Now, like Marcus Garvey said, if you're no good in the Americas, you're not going to be any good in the
Exactly.
Right? Now, the thing is this, the type of person who's going to actually buy a flight ticket to an African country, the mentality of the African American who's going to buy a ticket to go to Africa, get a visa to go to Africa, that person is already leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else because he understands what it is. So far in Africa, the African Americans that have come have been very high quality, which is a great thing, which is a good thing, because the average low quality person, low mentality person, their first rule of protocol, their first trip isn't going to be to Africa. So the African Americans you see in Africa are very high quality, high caliber, and they come to do business.
I mean, but my thing is the point I'm trying to get at. Like, I could jog around and go for a run in Africa without rednecks in a truck pulling me over, doing a citizen's arrest, and shooting me with a shotgun. So when I say, it's disingenuous to say the same problems. In fact, I'm gonna give you an analogy. Lou Major said this: in America, say America's a Ferrari. Black America's in the passenger seat. White America, they're driving the car. They control the direction we're going in, what's going to play on the radio, but we're just in the passenger seat. In Africa, it might be a Camry, but it's your Camry. You can change the engine. You can do whatever you want. You want to throw some
really though?
You can do whatever you want. So that's why when people pull basically when they say when we go over there, we're going to struggle or the same issues, pretty much in the words of holipism, the whole white man is Thanos and he's everywhere mentality. I'm like, nah, it's completely different. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect, but again, Lou Major said it the best.
At least it's yours.
Is a Ferrari, Black America. In fact, we're not even in the passenger seat. We're in the trunk of the Ferrari. That little space. We're in the trunk compartment of the Ferrari. White America's driving it. In Africa, it might be a Camry, but it's your Camry.
Exactly.
Just the World Bank and the IMF and the Chinese and the Indians and Lebanese, they're just driving it in. But see, can we look at and face the honest truth? and you have to acknowledge a problem in order to change it. So can we just acknowledge that we are subjugated and we are dominated wherever we are on this planet? Let's just start there now, and including if you go back to Africa, you will still deal with systemic. Maybe the people won't be there physically as much, but that's changing. How does it go? 300 million Chinese on the African continent by 2050? So they're going to start to settle and be a physical presence there. And we already see that they're denying people entrances to restaurants, beating African workers in Kenya, so on and so forth. So you're going to
say, this is the difference. You could slap that Chinese man, okay? You could slap the shit out of him, all right? Okay, just slap him, okay? You can put your hands on him, all right? You can fight back and not have to worry about vigilante rednecks. That's the difference.
Is it really?
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you just a quick question. And what was the name again? So I can speak to you directly.
Pro-woman Michelle, but pro-woman is my username. Yeah.
Michelle. I'm gonna call you Michelle.
Okay.
So Michelle, here's the thing: it's like this, right? In Africa, you might have problems with us as Africans. But if I walk into a business and it's owned by you and you disrespect me, I can deal with that right there, and I can get the authorities who are going to be on my side because they came with me, because I drive around with police officers in my Jeep. So now they get out too.
You mean you as a part of the elite, that's how it
No, what I'm saying is this. Me as an African. For example, in Nigeria, you're in my country. So you need to have the requisite level of respect because I can deal with you in my country. I'm not going to do that to you because my country is friendly. But you're going to respect yourself in my country because my country can be unfriendly. Do you understand what I'm saying? To be able to exercise that type of power as to how you want to be treated, that's very rare for somebody who has a certain skin complexion. But in Africa, that's the type of treatment you can demand.
Can you really? Because if you could, would we be in this position to begin with? Would the Chinese be able to execute those kinds of contracts? And then as a woman, and I have a conflict or run into a bad business deal, and can I really expect the authorities to come in and intervene? See, my thing is, guys, first of all, we are in agreement on a lot. My concern with...
Before you go forward, let me answer your first question.
Okay.
Yes, the answer is yes, right? And here's why. Now, your first question was, is that really the case? Yes, that's the case, right? Now, another secondary issue we have to look at is it doesn't matter what your gender is, because in Africa, we still have the proper formation. The men are still men, the women are still women. If someone comes in from another culture and disrespects our women, he better not do it in front of us because we'll handle those guys. Because at the end of the day, how another culture can treat your women says something about the men of that culture, because the men are the protectors of the culture and the women within the culture. So you don't really see a situation where someone from another culture is just disrespecting Nigerian women or African women in general that are in Nigeria. That's not the case. Now, the case is this. Right now, a lot of African nations are still recovering from what was done to them 200 to 300 years ago. A lot of Africans are waking up to their duties and understanding what must be done. And what must be done is ownership. When you own something, you control who can use it and who can't use it. Power is exclusive. You say, here's who can't come here and here's who can. See, in Africa, the only reason that the people who look like us can have breathing room is because we have a situation where we can dictate who comes here and who can't. So when there's a high number of a group from a certain country and we decide, you know what, we're tired of these people, what we're going to do is we're going to conduct sweeps. And we're going to conduct sweeps and we're going to say, hey, look, what are your pay? You don't look like you're a Nigerian. where are your papers for being here? Show us your immigration status. And once they show that status, it might show that they're not supposed to be there. So we're going to exercise all power to get them out of the country. So that's the thing when you own and control your own country or your own territory. There's certain things you can and can't do.
And I agree with you. And that is the point, that the place where I want us to get to. My concern is that if we think that just because we go and repatriate back to the African continent, back to a continent that is still subjugated and dominated on many levels, back to a place where there is still internalized oppression. So even if you aren't encountering Europeans or Chinese or Arabs or Indians directly, you will encounter their internalization of that racism within the people that you meet.
That's not true. That's not true. You go to Nigeria, for example. Travel to Nigeria. Have you ever traveled to Nigeria?
No, I haven't. But Dynas has talked about seeing.
Where in Africa? Where in Africa have you traveled to?
But I've been to Africa though. I've been to Africa because that's the other thing.
Where in Africa have you traveled to?
I've been to Ghana, Togo, and Benin, and I've been throughout Ghana. So I went to Kumasi.
Okay, so you've been to Ghana, you've been to Togo, and you've been to Benin. Well, there's other countries in Africa that you should visit as well. And the thing is, you travel throughout the continent, you'll find what you're looking for. Because you sound like somebody who's already gone to Togo, Ghana, Benin. But if you travel throughout the rest of the continent, you're going to find other places that you really enjoy. I guarantee you. Now, if you ran into a position where you've seen most of the businesses and things aren't owned by Africans, if you go to Nigeria, you're going to see a lot of businesses owned by African people.
Africa is black managed. It's still not owned. Sure, you can find business, but what about industry that's black owned?
The same thing.
Hold on. Pro moment. Until you go to Nigeria, then this conversation is over. Because I mean,
see, that's the card you guys.
Listen. You don't understand the
situation is with African people.
No, you're not gonna talk over me. You're not gonna talk over me on my platform. Okay. The richest black man on the planet is Nigerian. The richest billionaires in Nigeria black people on the planet are in Nigeria. The majority of major industries are controlled and dominated by Nigeria. I have talked about that over and over and over again, and that's why I love Nigeria. So I'm gonna invite you to Nigeria. You come to Otoruo, come and visit. Go to the southeast too, Ibo Kwenu, and come and visit. In fact, hold on, stop the show. Now, do you really? Okay, let me tell you something about my Igbo brothers and sisters. Do you really think they're gonna allow foreigners to come into Andaman State and dominate? Hell no. That shit is ran up and down by Igbo. They don't play that. Everybody knows that. So, bro, that's what I'm saying.
If they didn't, then Africa wouldn't be in the position that it's in. And Ebube has just said that younger generations have realized what Africa should be, and they won't accept it being anything less. So if they dominated and controlled it to start, and if they were able to stop people from coming in there and doing what they wanted to do from the very beginning, we wouldn't be in this position. I agree with you guys. I love Africa too. I plan on going back and forth. And when I came back from
hold on. We're talking about Nigeria right now. Okay, somebody made up a great point in the chat room. UBA, Zenith Bank, GT Bank, all these major banks are all black owned, Nigerian owned. I mean, it's just, again, Nigerian, I said this before, outside of Senegal, Nigerian dominate their
economy.
It's like, again, from the banks, major industries, everything. Nigerians dominated.
And if there's another group like Lebanese, people will say, "Oh, that's the Lebanese spot right there." You know, like it's at a certain point where Michelle, right?
Yeah.
Michelle, it's at a certain point where, here's the thing, like you don't want to paint with a broad brush, right? You want to go to all of Africa and you want to experience all of it.
So you know what to do.
And you want to explore all of it, and you want to say, you know what? Like you said, maybe I want to settle in Nigeria. Maybe I want to settle in Ivory Coast. Maybe I want to settle in Senegal. Those are very different countries, very different energies.
same
You go to
issues
Nigeria, what you
throughout.
should do,
They've all been
what you should
colonized.
do is you take 3 weeks out and you go to Nigeria. You go to Lagos for about 1 week, and I'm biased. I'm in Abuja. You know, that's my hometown when I go back to Nigeria. Come to Abuja for 2 weeks, and you'll understand something about Nigeria. You go to Nigeria first before you make up your mind about Africa.
Well, you know, that's the thing that people say. I don't think you can ever, whenever you have an opinion on Africa, you can never have gone to enough places in Africa. If you say, I've been everywhere, they'll say, well, maybe you weren't at this particular village or that particular city. But what I do know for sure is that it has all been colonized. What I'm saying, guys, we agree. We want the best for Africa. We want to see African people all over the world empowered and protected and standing in and having the rightful place in the world that we should have and once had. My concern is that if people take the position of, I'm done, I've arrived, once I go back, I change my name, I do what Dinah's done, all that stuff, then I'm finished. I don't have anything else to do. And that's not the case. There's work to be done even from the African continent. And that's what I want people in the expatriate movement, the repatriation movement, to understand, that they are not finished just because they go there. Another popular YouTuber.
Well, here's the thing, Michelle. Here's the thing, right? Once you come to Africa, you're just gonna land at the airport, right? It's like moving to Florida. If you move to Florida and you move from Michigan, the temperature might change. You might see some palm trees, but at the end of the day, you gotta create a money-making industry in Florida. You might have to get a job. You might have to get a place. Like, the struggle doesn't stop just because you landed at an airport in Africa. You got to get out and say, you know what, I'm me, and here's what I bring to the African continent. You can't just go there and think all my problems have gone away because I got on a plane that's going to Africa. And another thing is Togo, Benin, and Ghana. That's a good start, but there are other African nations you got to go to before you cast a wide opinion on Africa. And one of the countries I'd say go to is Nigeria. Another country I'd say go to is Kenya, Ethiopia as well. Like there's a lot of countries in Africa you want to go to. But I'm going to always advocate and say Black Americans should go to Nigeria because I'm Nigerian.
Right. Bias there.
Bias in the building, clearly. But what I'm going to say is that until you've gone to Nigeria, because here's the special thing about Nigerians.
It's all been colonized.
Well, hey, listen.
Hold on. Okay, Pro, just woe is me.
No, I'm not saying that.
Hold on. We are telling you that Nigerians dominate their economy, and you're still woe is me. So I mean, what do you want? What do you try? Okay, Pro, here we go. What are you trying to accomplish now? Let me know what you're trying to accomplish. We are telling you that Nigerians dominate their economy. And you're still, woe is me. It's just, oh my God, the white man, the Lebanese, the Chinese man. What are you trying to accomplish?
We have to face the truth of where we are, and then we can start to work to get to where we want and need to be. That's what I'm saying. I came back 10 years ago telling everybody, I said, integrate Africa into your plans for life. Whatever your plans are, integrate Africa into it. I didn't come back telling everybody, you got to go to Africa and live. You got to repatriate. If you don't have a Black community, the conscious community over here, how organized are we over here? If we aren't organized and we can't form community over here, then we're not going to just magically go to Africa and be able to do that. But the repatriates that I know of aren't necessarily that well organized on the ground in Africa. They do the same things that they do over here. They have meetings, they have events, they have rituals, they wear African garb, so on and so forth. But I don't know of a.
I agree with that.
Okay, see, because we're on the same page, guys. We're on the same page. We're just hashing out ideas to get to a common goal that we are all in agreement on. So that's what I'm saying. My concern is that people think that just going to Africa, you're done, that you don't have anything else to do in the struggle for Africa.
Michelle, when have I ever said that on this platform?
You said that all the time. I've been in.
I say that all the time. That when you go to Africa, the work is done. That you just kick back. I've said that, really.
Yeah, you said, I'm out of here. I'm gonna go over there, and I'm just gonna have.
Go to Africa and just kick back, and the work is done. I've said that, really.
No, you said that when I go there, I'm going there and I'm just gonna go and just stay and just live because I have too many
I
problems
said
here and
that.
I'm
I
gonna
said
go
I'm going to go to Africa, stay and live. I've said that.
and why haven't you done it? You haven't done it because you wouldn't be able
But,
to
but,
have
but,
the
but
same
I've said that I'm just going to go to Africa and retire. That's what you're
that,
saying. I've said that. I've said that, Michelle. Really? I've said that.
well, I'm sorry, what did you say? That you okay, what is your feeling?
Oh
Is your
God.
feeling that once the people repatriate, or what are people saying? The people who are calling for repatriation as a solution to our problems, as I've heard Blacks say, if you want to end racism, escape racism by repatriating. That's not escaping racism. That's maybe just not having to deal with a certain direct effect of it, but you're not escaping racism just because you move back to Ghana. That's all I want to get clear. I just don't want people.
Well, Michelle, here's the thing. You might be arguing another argument with brothers who never put forth that position. Nobody here is saying you just landed at the airport at Murtala Muhammad or
Yeah,
Nnamdi Azikiwe. No, your problem is solved. Like nobody on this platform has said that, but I understand if people have said that to you, but nobody here has said that. What we're saying is best thing is, for example, Michelle, if you want to go to Nigeria and you want to like live there, I would say somebody like you would be well in Abuja, right? Garki, or maybe like Wuse, or maybe even Metama, depending on what your budget is like. But once you go there and you realize, you know what, I can do this, here's my particular asset to this nation, you might be able to do that and make a living off of it. And then you might be able to procreate and have children that live out there and they're raised like indigents. And before you know it, your children have a second home. You have U.S. citizenship, but your children have been raised in Nigeria, so they understand the Nigerian culture. And before you know it, they have an option as to opposed to maybe they want to stay in Nigeria and enjoy the fact that the people that run things look like them. Or they want to come to the United States and enjoy the benefits in the United States. That's all.
The people who run things are still on a European educational system, right? Is it
Well,
still?
it
You said
depends.
that on this platform before, that there's still many African countries and even in Nigeria that the educational system is still European based and
So,
modern.
Michelle, this is what you need to do, Michelle. This is what we want you to do. We want you to come to Africa and change the education system. Okay, you lead
That's
that.
what we need from you. That's what we need.
Well, maybe that's something that you guys should do, since you say that everything.
Goddamn, Michelle. I mean, you're gonna have to pick up the ball somewhere and run and score. I mean, you just
That's
complaining.
that's what I've been trying to do, and I want people to understand that just by repatriating, that's not finished. I do not hear you guys are saying that you haven't espoused that position, but I haven't heard people who are calling for repatriation espouse the position of I'm going to go there and fight. That the fight is not finished just because I go to Africa. I'm going to go to Africa and continue the fight from there. That's not what I'm hearing. And that's all I am saying. I do not disagree with the repatriation.
Hold on. Michelle, are you the 7-day in Venice?
No. How dare you call me that? No.
Okay. So you sound like this lady that called in and was like a Mormon or something. So
Oh,
Michelle, we want you. In fact, Michelle, this is what you do, Michelle. You're going to lead the call. You're going to put together an African-based educational system, and you're going to bring it to Africa.
No, here's what you're going to do. You're going to do just what you wanted me to do because you've been over there, right? You see how everything is run, and you have all these contacts on the ground. You are friends now, so you have a kingdom. Why don't you call for the change in your kingdom? Since you have a kingdom of your own.
Yeah, Michelle, that was the deflection method. He just gave you an assignment. You should say, you know what, let me go do that. You know.
No, well,
actually, if you want to be contrary to be contrary for contrary's sake, you can do that.
The fact that you guys think you need to give me one tells you that you don't know the one that I'm on already. So there are.
What are you doing, Michelle?
Actually, I don't want to talk a lot about it yet because a lot of
Michelle, you're trolling.
Wait. One thing I have done is I told you I made an investment in Africa, and his name is Isaac Livingstone, or Kujo Mensah, his traditional name. I put a young man through school. I'm developing contacts there on the ground. I've learned a lot about how education works there in Ghana. and some of the indoctrination that is done, even of teachers, based on, because I put him through school and he sent me some of the things that he was learning, so on and so forth. So there are things I'm doing. I don't want to talk a lot about it now because they're still in the works. But to assume that I don't have an assignment is for you guys to assume that you don't know what I am doing and what I have done. Guys, we're on the same page. We want to get to the same goal. The concern that I'm raising is that if people don't recognize the harsh realities of where we are, if they don't want to face it because it seems like it's too painful, I understand that. But it's even more painful to continue it, which we will do if we do not understand it. I understand there are a lot of positives that can be said about Nigeria. I said it before. I think Nigerians are some of the most brilliant people in the world, and there's a reason for that. I think many of them are not as high achieving as it may seem. I know some Nigerians, some Igbos actually in India right now, and they talk about the persecution and things that they have to undergo and endure. They took that boat ride over there to get over there, so that tells me that that things aren't as good as it may seem. If they had to go through what they had to go through just to go to Nigeria, I'm sorry, to go to India and basically be made. So there's a lot to do. That's all I'm saying. There's a lot to build on. There's a lot of potential, absolutely. But we can't pipe dream and not pretend like we don't have real problems that we actually have. That's all I'm saying. If you go to Africa and live, you've just traded off one set of problems for another, because we're going to have these problems until we are free and self-determining and able to determine our lives, our lands, and our resources for ourselves and do things on our own terms. That's all I'm saying, guys. That's what I want to get to. That's the Africa that you guys want as well. We're in agreement there. I'm just saying, just don't think because you go to Africa that you still don't have work to do. Go to Africa to fortify Africa so that you can protect your son, Dynast, who's probably never going to leave the United States. And some of your family, Ebube, is probably still going to be here in the United States. Are you guys going to just go to Africa there and just sit back and enjoy the breeze and watch black people everywhere else suffer? No. But if you fortify the continent and you turn it into a power base, much like the United States has done, much like Europe has done, they're able to go and help white people all over the world. That's what I want to see for Africa. That's all I'm saying. Do you guys disagree with that? That we need to go and fortify Africa and turn Africa into a power base such that we can go and protect and defend black people wherever we are, because we're never all going back to Africa. Do you guys agree with that or not? Hello?
Yeah. All right, Michelle. Michelle. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Well, no, really. Is that, what about that do you disagree with? Fortifying Africa, turning Africa into a home base, such that we're
Michelle,
able to...
when on this platform did we ever say we aren't doing that?
When have you ever said that was your intention?
Okay, I want you to do. Hold on, Michelle. I'm gonna hang up. I want you to go back and watch all 1,000 of my videos, then call back in when you're done. Okay?
No, because if I'd heard you saying that, then I wouldn't have this question now.
Have you watched all 1,000 videos?
I have watched enough. I can't watch all.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I see you, Dynast. It's out here, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, basically what we're saying is this, man. At the end of the day, with the geopolitical situation in Africa, we're going to have a situation whereby we have China who wants to flex their muscles. We have America who wants to flex their muscles. And we have Africa who wants to be free. Hopefully, if we're smart on the African continent, we're going to play the political game and be able to play the two titans against each other to be able to get the best things that we can get.
Yeah, and guys, sorry about that. I mean, yeah, Chris, Michelle, if you're still watching, go watch all 1,000 videos, then come back. But Ebube, tell everybody about you got a YouTube page now. Where can people go subscribe to your page? Yeah, then we'll close out.
Yeah, so I got a channel. Listen, if you want to see my channel, you got to type in Up Close and Center. Up Close and Center. The logo is black, the lettering is white. Go there and catch, because what I'm doing is I'm doing geopolitical analysis. So go ahead and go there and subscribe. You're going to enjoy it. So far, I got maybe 1 or 2 videos up, but I'm going to be adding content every single week. So go to Up Close and Center and make sure that you subscribe. Watch everything that's there because you're going to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Hold on 1 second. Let me just make sure. Let me pull it up real quick. So guys, everyone, I want everyone to go subscribe right now. Are Up Close and Censor, CENSOR?
CENTER.
Oh, it's Center. Okay, Up Close.
Yeah, Up Close and Center.
Here we go. I got it right here, guys. Listen, I'm going to post a link in the chat room, you guys. I want you guys to go subscribe. Make sure you guys go subscribe to Brother Ebube's platform. I'm going to put it in the chat room right now.
And you'll like the content. Everybody that goes there is going to like the content. The content is solid. Geopolitical analysis of the African continent with an international view in mind. So you're going to like it.
All right, guys. So the link is in the chat room. I'm also going to put it up on the screen and also be in the description as well. Guys, make sure you go and support Brother Ebube. Brother Ebube, anything else you'd like to share in closing?
Just basically at this point, Africa is between 2 roads, right? Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of African nations are going to default, but a lot of African nations can pull agreements where the default doesn't mean anything, and they can go ahead and prepare themselves for the 20th century, for the future, and go from there.
Right. So everyone, make sure you subscribe to Ebube's YouTube page. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this content as well. Go to dynastymir.com. I need your guys' email so you can be on the email list. So you'll be in. No, Lou Major did not call in because Lou Major will eat Michelle alive. We just don't have time. So guys, these are emails. I get you on a subscription list, email list, so you know what's going on. Until next time, family. Dynasty Mirror, search for Uhuru. Peace.